Okay, this is going to be episode 36 of OverSight. Much like the Overwatch League, we just take a solid half a year off. You don't hear from us. No one knows. No one even knows if it's continuing. But eventually, we do return and just pick up where we left off, right? And what happened in the meantime?
You know, much like the Overwatch League, there's also like a bunch of like amateur tier 2 podcasts that get significantly less viewership. But don't worry, you know, the big boys come back eventually, and that's where we are right now. Yeah,
I mean, we're just trying to give them a head start, you know, but you know, some people, you just can't give them enough advantages here. What do you want me to do? Record a podcast for you and put it on the channel? Like, you know.
Wait, I like the way Monty... How long has it been, though?
We did the last one, I think, right before the finals, maybe.
Yeah, so, July.
It was quite
July, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of a head start.
It's been a while. We'll have to get another mega episode coming in before the season too.
Yeah, I notice also Monty has like taken that American trope from movies where what you do is at the end of one movie, right? It's like a big cliffhanger, ends, the movie's great. The second one always begins when like, you know, like something's happened in their life, like they've had a baby, they've grown a mustache, like they've gone to some other country, and they're like, hey, what have you been up to? Because it's like a great way to introduce the characters again, you know? So Monty's gone with like, you know, like sequel to Lethal Weapon or something, you know, something like that. One of those type of movies at the beginning.
I just disappeared.
I see.
You know, yeah, it shows the passage of time, right? Yes. I'm on, you know, I'm like James Bond. Which one movie was that where he's like working on an island afterwards, or he just like shows up randomly? I forget.
Was it one of the old Bonds? No,
I think it was. I'm trying to remember.
I haven't watched that many of the new ones because they were kind of rubbish, but
yeah, they were.
This is Thorin's like cutscene. It's like he's alone in the wilderness. You know, he's been off the grid for like 2 years, right? He's putting his hair out. And Monty comes in, is like, "Hey, Thorin, we got to bring you back, man."
I figured I should look as villainous as possible for the start of the next Overwatch League season, so that's the goal.
Okay, right. Anyway, we'll start the episode now. So to introduce our guests, because I just never normally do it. So it's, again, while we're starting off, I've obviously forgotten how this whole thing's done. So I'm making all the amateur mistakes of doing what real people do on podcasts. I'll introduce who the guests are just so people know. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got Jay, and he is the general manager. Yeah, general manager of the Toronto Defiant. Before that, he was with Splice, and then the team that became Splice was that team ages ago that was like that like McCree team or whatever, which is worth bringing up because it actually did have some people would know. It had Flame, who's from the Houston Outlaws. It had Steel, the band CSGO player, and a few names you might recognize in there. Then we've obviously, in the other box, we have got Brad, aka Sephy, and he is someone who in the past was working with the San Francisco Shock and now is with the Atlanta Reign. So we've got two people for the expansion teams here. So again, that's quite good, Monty, because what we get to do is I like it when storylines are cyclical. So we've already been through the first Overwatch League season. We've seen who the really overrated executives are, who the shit coaches are. It took a while to figure it out. And eventually now most of them have been fired or picked up by teams that are expansion teams and don't know any better. So now we're going to see with the expansion teams, let's start all over again. So what I'm saying is this, Monty, it's like the sort of Harvard induction talk. You know what they say? Look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you, the three of you will make it to the end of the squad. It's like that. Like, I want to know in about 40 episodes how many of these guys are still either with the same team or coach or general manager. So all I'm saying is, you know, your work is ahead of you, gentlemen. Now, now we'll find out.
Technically, though, Brad was also in season 1, wasn't he? Though.
Yeah, he was with the Shock.
Yeah, he's roasting me, man. He's roasting.
He's made it back.
My Selfless too, man. Every time Selfless took the stage, he just cut him to shreds, man. So,
I feel like Jay, just to set the tone here, mate. Like, some of that was intentionally with sort of a wink, as I said it. You know the part where I sort of mentioned about how, you know, some of them got let go and then picked up by expansion slots. That wasn't just coincidence, mate. I was sort of doing that on purpose. I don't want to like pull back the curtain too much and reveal the old man working the levers, but you know, it's not accidental. Put it that way. You don't accidentally trip over and flame someone like that. So anyway, thanks for making it overt. So now he knows definitely we roasted him. Okay. So let's start there. Actually, what do you think of that as a topic? I thought this would be a good place to break the ice. Is obviously, in a game like Overwatch, where the Overwatch League is supposed to be the real official start, and a lot of the stuff before that with coaches, etc., it wasn't as professional, there wasn't the same infrastructure, people sometimes didn't even live with the teams, etc. One of the things, having seen coaching and general managers and all these things be implemented in other esports games, is obviously the first generation of these people. Some of them are going to be bad just because no one's done the job before. You have to learn on the fly how to do a job. Then obviously, then you're sorting amongst all the people who's actually the best at the job, who's started but's too bad and has to be fired. You know, there's all this like turnover is going to go on in the first few seasons. What is it like, Brad, trying to start a job like that? Because if people hear that name, general manager, they're going to already think like sports. Like, right, well, you must have decided the whole team then, or this is your vision, or whatever the results are, you will be judged accordingly, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure what the question was, Thorin. Sorry, but I think you're asking, you know, like what are, you know, let me just talk about coaching. And I mean, yeah, sure. The first generation of coaches, players, managers, staff, everything, right, is bound to have, like, what are the odds that, you know, 12 new teams, like, make all the right decisions, pick all the right people, right? Like, the odds are close to zero, you know, like, that's just a fact. Even if you have a little bit of history to go off of, you know, like how much of like pre-OWL, how much of those teams succeeded because players popped off or it was a good meta for them, right? Sure. Or, you know, they just built up a legacy. There was a lot of like invite-only tournaments for a lot of 2017, right? So like, what does that tell you about the, you know, about the global landscape as far as talent goes? Not only that, but just there was such a like a lack of tournaments, like really like, you know, international tournaments, right? None leading up to Overwatch League itself. So, you know, the mixed teams, right? Like the concept of a mixed nationality team with mixed languages. This was like a whole new concept, right? Like some people thought it's going to be rife with problems. Other people, you know, correctly, I would say, predicted that like those problems, those challenges are more surmountable, right? So, you know, like the common thinking, I can tell you that the common thinking among a lot of coaching staff that I talked to before OWL started was that teams like Philly, that were doing like insanely mixed like international rosters, that was like a gamble. That was like a serious gamble. And they turned out, you know, to be able to work through it, right? They made it like really, really deep and they did a great job. So, you know, that's like a takeaway. That's like a lesson that you have to learn between season 1 and 2. And I think for the coaches that didn't have the greatest of starts, like I didn't have the greatest of start in season 1, right? I started.
I had a pretty hamstrung roster.
I mean, yeah, okay. That's what was like weird about your situation too, I think, is because obviously like they let you go and hired Krusty, but you never got a chance to actually do like, so first off, for those of you who don't know, Brad also was the owner of Selfless. And so, you know, Sinatra was on that team and, you know, you're used to coaching Sinatra, obviously. And you didn't even have a chance to really see the roster actually take shape. Like San Francisco management made a decision to essentially give up the first half of the season waiting for people to turn of age, but you were never given that opportunity to actually like see that process through, which I thought was weird.
I mean, I want to own some of my mistakes. So, you know, they made many of their decisions based on my input, right? And so one of my mistakes was underestimating just what it takes to win in the Overwatch League season 1. And do I think that that's a mistake that a lot of people are going to make in season 2? Yeah.
When you say that though, can you like expand a bit? Like what was your, what like misconception do you think you had? Or where was like the, you know, maybe you just took the wrong angle on it. Like, did you value? Because one of the things I was alluding to with why I made it very open-ended, asking about like coaching and general managers, is because I actually think genuinely, because people don't know what goes into it, they don't realize that it's not like everyone knows this formula. Like in certain sports, like well, these are the positions you want to recruit, and these are the schools you recruit from, and all these things that like there's definitely a lot of wiggle room in traditional sports, but there's also like general things that people take as principles, and at the moment they either don't exist in Overwatch, or we're only just piecing them together now. Like what you just said there about the Fusion team. If you told someone at the end of the Overwatch League, oh, see this team that was in the final, Philadelphia Fusion? Yeah, they actually got all their players pretty much at the end of everyone signing players, and they were all the players no one wanted except, the odd name, like someone like Carpe could obviously have been on a better team probably. So aside from that, people would have expected them to be a team of throwaways and misfits, yet you go even a couple of stages into the Overwatch League, everyone was raving about that roster. Look how much depth it's got. that's incredible, the way they've mixed all these players. You know, they've got the highest ceiling along with the Spitfire. Like, people always were saying that. So it shows that, like, no one really had any of the principles down first.
Yeah, you know, I mean, so in season 1, and this is a bit of I guess not public info, but I mean, there were some players who were quick to sign, and some players who really, really held out until they found a situation that they were comfortable with, right? So, like, Shock was one of the first rosters to finalize. Like, we wanted to get out the gate and sign people quick. Players that we wanted that we didn't get, but that we made offers to, guys like Carpe, guys like Fury. They ended up literally in the finals, you know what I mean? Like, you know, they found the environment and the deal that was best for them. So there was a couple of guys, like, towards the end of the signing windows that were, like, still rockstar players that knew their value and knew that they could wait. But you're right. Like, a lot of the guys that Philly picked up were basically considered leftovers as talent scouts. Like, a lot of people failed to properly scout the EU region, us included. And, you know, like, I think, like, even though they were basically leftovers, like, they should not have been. That was just people failing to do their job. As far as, like, you know, me personally, like, you know, the mistakes I made, you asked, I guess one of the big ones was just, like, underestimating the importance of, like, a straight up, like, Winston main. Right, like, we picked up.
I think main tank was probably the one that was probably the principle that emerged the most over season 1. Right, is that generally I think from what I remember, I think there was only, like, one team that was good that didn't have a really strong main tank. I'm trying to think who it was. Let me think. Who would that have been?
Well, it was Philly for a lot of the time because Fraggy was sort of
there we go. Weird. I think that was the only, and by the way, think about that. The one team that everyone would agree was very good that didn't have like the best main tank was the one that had arguably the best DPS duo in the league. Like,
yeah. Also,
and what I don't want to do here is I don't want to trash my former players.
Sure.
But Super and Nomi, if you ask them both, they would both say that they were more comfortable in Ryan than Winston. So that's, you know, Like, basically, I underestimated specifically Winston, the importance of Winston in the meta, and the importance of getting basically an experienced Winston player with high level, like, recent competitive experience on the character. So that was one mistake I made. The other one was just, again, you know, signing too many underage players. You know, the combination of everything.
I mean,
right?
was that a mistake though? That's
here's
just
the thing,
choice,
Monty.
right?
This is the sick
it
part.
It was a choice. Yeah.
I will say this, Brad. This is the part that screwed you on that. Is like, right. if you'd been the general manager of Shock, you might win the fucking award this year, mate. Because having those players prepared and then people wanting to see them and then look at all the other players. The problem is because you're the coach, and as we see, obviously they went with someone else who was a proven winner. Fair enough. Okay, hard to argue against that. But it is like, if these players end up being amazing for Shock now, the ones that you signed that you couldn't play, that's like you got the jam jar almost all the way off and then someone else just went, oh, pop, there we go, that was me, I did that. It's like, I was the one loosening it, what the fuck. It has to feel a bit like that, right?
You're putting a lot into the title. I can tell you that I was at, you know, even though I didn't have the title of general manager, the idea that I didn't have input on every roster decision that we made, almost every roster decision that we made, would be incorrect. Like, a lot of these mistakes, and I guess you could say that they're long-term okay, but short-term they were mistakes, are my mistakes. But they're ones I've learned from. You know, like, I haven't signed any underage players this season. I want to try to win every single game start to finish. I had, you know,
okay. He's learned.
We went with a strong tank core, you know, from experienced tank core this year as well. You know, not people that were new to the hero like Nevix was, or, you know, my main tanks who didn't have a lot of history on Winston. So, you know, I think that is the kind of the takeaway. It's like by stage 3, you know, we went 6-4. I won 5 of my last 7 games in the Overwatch League. Like, I had a pretty good finish, I guess you could say, before they kicked me at the end of stage 3. But I think the takeaway is, like, who's still around that didn't have the hottest season 1, but they're still here in season 2. It's got to be the people that have shown to their own management or to other people who are making decisions that they've learned, that they they own their mistakes and they learn from them, and they're here to improve and do better this year. So,
except that guy from Florida Mayhem, who they were doing that. They were like, listen, we're going to ride with you on this one. Like, we believe in your vision. Actually, just get him out of it. Actually, just get him out the fucking door now, like 1 second before the Overwatch League began.
That's kind of crazy.
That was a bit rough, wasn't it? It's like, come on, surely you could have made this decision in the massive off season we just had and let the guy find another team.
I mean, it's crazy too, because now with Ryder out, like they're going to have to find another coach on a very short timeline. And I think what's interesting is, I know Jay hasn't said anything yet, but I think
they found a coach already, though, promise.
Okay, did they announce?
Yeah, they announced him.
Yeah. I think like, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of teams were, so usually the schedule for those people who don't know has been like most of the teams were getting together somewhere in, before Christmas and like practicing for a little bit of time there, going home for like a month, and have now returned to Los Angeles to start really scrimming in earnest. Did you guys both do that? Or is this the first time you guys have been your teams have been in one place?
Say again. What was the question again?
A lot of teams were getting together and scrimming before Christmas, and then took some time off, and then are now coming back. Did you guys do that, or is this the first time you've gotten all your players here? It may be different for you guys because of visas, I guess.
Okay, so for my team, we actually started trials in about around October, and so once we finished trials in October, and around the second week of October, we pretty much finalized our roster. And after trials ended, we basically just went hard into scrims from October into late November. And then that's basically, we had like pretty much 6 days a week, 2 to 3 blocks a day, all the way from October into November. And then once that basically was the trial / boot camp in Korea. This is when we were in Seoul. And then once that ended, basically I came back here to LA, and then I basically did the scouting for all the housing while the team was getting ready for the transition over from Korea over to LA and getting all the visa stuff ready. While they were doing that, they were basically from their homes, they would still do, I guess, lighter scrims. They would try to do only 1 block a day, maybe like 4 days a week, and try to do like relaxed scrims against the teams that were still in Korea or Korea contenders teams. They weren't taking it seriously. It was more to just stay warm until they got to LA.
Got it.
Basically, yeah.
And what did you do? What did you guys do, Brad?
We had our very first scrim on December 30th.
Okay. So we'll get into tryout, because I'm actually very curious about both your guys' tryout processes, because I think this is going to be really interesting to see which players you guys ended up picking up. But anyway, back to what
let's do that topic though.
We will. Hold on. Back to what I was saying though, is that about the Florida thing, I know we got sort of off topic, but about the Florida thing, why I find that weird is because a lot of teams were using either the tryout periods or like Jay had done, where they were scrimming for like a month or so before Christmas, before many teams took a break. Many teams were using that period because now everybody knew that there was going to be a new patch. So the teams knew that they weren't going to be playing on that patch for Overwatch League. So a lot of them were like trying to fix their comms or trying to institute coaching structures, as opposed to really focusing on strategy in particular. And so why I find it weird that Florida would get rid of their coach now is because you definitely wanted to do that before, so that you would come in to this period of time looking specifically at strategy rather than trying to shore up your comms or anything like that. And so a lot of, especially the established teams, were already doing that. But maybe I
think it comes down to, and this is pure speculation on my part, so I apologize in advance.
That's what this show's all about. Go ahead.
But I would imagine that, Florida doesn't have the best brand among players, right? From season 1. And nor does it among staff. So, in a like you have a team that is basically mostly Korean. And then you have every expansion team in the world, plus existing teams fighting over Korean coaches, players, whatever. And, you're a Korean coach, you are fluent in Korean and you have some English skills and you're like accomplished, and you're getting offers from 4 different teams. Is Florida at the top of your list? Probably not. You know what I mean? So They were probably hoping that they could make it work with whatever they got, and somewhere along the way here, I can only assume, that something's just not working out for them. Doesn't seem like it's clicking, and so they make a last minute change, and maybe it's late, but if it's not working, then it's not working. I don't know the whole dynamic. You know what I mean? Like, who knows why they're doing what they're doing?
Who knows anything? Philosophers would say, can we even know? Epistemology, it's an interesting field, but not one for this podcast, unfortunately. So let's just speculate for now.
I can only assume that they've been losing scrims and they want to point the finger at someone. Whether they're pointing at the right guy or not, who knows?
I mean, I thought that they took a bold decision going with all the leftover Koreans from all the other teams, because another route they could have taken was just pressure the Swedish government to pay some sort of subsidy for keeping Swedish players employed in Overwatch, because as far as I can tell, they're only competent as desk analysts. So maybe Tavik will prove me wrong this season. You get a chance now, homie. You got all those Koreans. I mean, they are washed up Koreans, so I don't really out of the frying pan into the fire, as it were. But you got a chance, I guess. You know, you got a chance. Right. Anyway, I wanted to do that topic a bit more than Monty.
Yeah. So let's move over to that, because like we've actually never talked about the tryout process really, especially for new teams, and obviously both of you guys are leading expansion teams right now. So let's start with Jay, because we haven't heard a lot from him. What was obviously, like, you guys picked up Bishop pretty early on, the former London Spitfire coach and former Kongdu pro player from when I was casting back in Apex.
Can we start there?
Can we?
Sure.
Jay, let's be real, mate. Like, the rep that Bishop had by the end of the Overwatch League season wasn't very good. Like, a lot of people will look even at the success of the team. They were a very confused team in the middle part. He got fired. They also
won stage 1.
They did, but they also had some pretty bad performances in the other stage. By the way, I'm not saying this is my opinion, but the community consensus was people thought this shows, this is a coach that isn't good, or people don't respect him, or whatever it might be. So it's a pretty controversial pick that person as a head coach. So I want to just know, what was the thinking on you guys' part? Like, what was the direction you were going for?
So there's a lot of I guess hearsay based on what happened to him with London, because he kind of left the team of his own volition after stage 1 because his mom had cancer, and I'm free to talk about it. He's given me permission to talk about it. His mom's cancer is in remission. She's doing very well now and everything. But he left it because his mom had health issues, and so he left the team voluntarily, and that's had nothing to do with the team's performances after stage 1. But Bishop even said he's like that. His family came first, and he's not going to sit there and defend himself against Reddit and against the internet. He doesn't care.
Okay. I will say, to be fair, in that scenario, it is the reason why, unfortunately, there will be people who might actually legitimately left, but you'll never find out, is because orgs do still insist on lying and pretending like everyone chooses to leave every team and no one was ever fired from any jobs. So that doesn't really help. But if that's the case, then that's obviously completely different to what people's assumption was. Yeah.
So I mean, Bishop is not actually a person that really cares too much for social media, and he doesn't really read people's opinions about him. So that's one thing. And I got to actually sit down and speak to him for like a good 4 hours one night on Discord. And I got to hear his philosophy on teams, and I got to hear his philosophy on how to create rosters. And him and I just hit it off. And
did you have any of the players before he came, or was he the first part, or what?
He was literally the first part. I just wanted a head coach first before I pursued any players, before anything else. I actually wanted to have a coaching staff first before I actually looked at players. So after Bishop was signed on, I asked him to help draft a coaching staff. So we actually drafted a assistant coach, which was Bubbly, and a strategic coach, which is Dongguk, which is originally, he had a different name, but it was Don, who was on the LA Valiant. And then we got Baroy from Winston's Lab, and basically I created the core of our coaching staff, those 4. And Baroy helped us with a lot of statistics, trying to figure out which players we wanted. And using those 4 is how we started basically looking for which players we wanted to target.
All right, so I'm going to stop you there before we start to get into players, because I think it's actually, having talked to Brad previously earlier this week, I know that both teams now formed coaching staff first before they did tryouts. So let's talk about your coaching staff, because obviously some people might know Baroy from Winston's Lab. He got pretty well known there for being super smart in the way he was using statistics and doing analysis. Obviously, Winston's Lab was a great site that everybody used in the scene, especially analysts. the teams used it, I used it, all the analysts in the scene used it. So how are you, after you form your coaching staff, how are you dividing your coaching roles before we get into the player part? And then we'll ask Brad the same question, then we'll get into the players. So how are you guys setting up your coaching staff currently?
So basically, Bishop himself sets the general, as the head coach, he's the overall strategy for the team, while Don leads basically the overall reviews daily for the team. And Bubbly is basically our one-on-one coach. He does player performance reviews, and then he does all the player one-on-ones whenever generally he doesn't lead the VOD reviews. And then Dennis will do a lot of reviews individually with Bishop himself. So he'll go over like statistical reviews with Bishop, and then Bishop himself will come back to both Bubbly and Don to go over the actual statistics that that him and Dennis reviewed, because obviously Bishop is the one that's bilingual, and once he gets the information and all the stats from Dennis, he comes back and gives it to the two Korean coaches. Cool. And then it gets disseminated to the players that way. Okay.
And also, just for people who don't know, Bubbly was a former pro as well, and was a coach on Seoul last season. It was part of that whole like weird Seoul coach clusterfuck that ended with like all of them leaving. So you guys picked him up from Seoul. Felt good about it.
Yeah, and one interesting thing why Bishop was very comfortable with Bubbly was, so when Bishop was team captain of Gyeongju Panthera, Bubbly was team captain of Gyeongju Unsia, and he remembered Bubbly would always give him a hard time when they would do internal scrims between the two. So that's why he respected Bubbly a lot.
And obviously, it's absolutely logical that someone from Gyeongju Unsia would be second in command to someone from Gyeongju Panthera. That's the natural way of the world. The order is being reinstated. Yeah, well done. Yeah. You figured that one out.
Pretty much.
Okay, so what about some of the? You want to talk about the team that they picked up there, Monty?
Let's get Brad's coaching thoughts first, and then we'll go into the player tryouts for both teams. That way, we're not like rewinding too far. So, Brad, you and I were talking the other day, but I know you had a similar process for how you were looking at coaches and picking people up, and before you started doing tryouts, or at least concurrently.
It was before, actually. Yeah, it was a nearly identical story to what Jay just told. I was the first hire in the same way that Bishop was the first hire. I had insisted when I got hired that a person come along with me, and I was able to convince my very awesome bosses that this was a good idea.
Who was that person?
And that was Silence. His name is Dimitri. His online name is Silence. He was a analyst with us on Last Night's Leftovers, who I had found off a Reddit thread that he posted, where he posted like a 30-page GOATS breakdown like a week after GOATS came out. And just reading through it, it was some of the most insightful stuff I'd seen. Having now known Silence for a good half a year or whatever, I can say that he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in Overwatch, and I've met quite a few. So he was somebody I really, really wanted to have on my team. And I would say that so he's the assistant coach. We also picked up Kasaurus, who was with 1 Point, and they had a pretty good run in EU Contenders. He was part of like a coaching tryout that we did. So we put together like a 1 hour VOD of a team in North American Contenders. It was like 3 maps, a bunch of team fights with comms, and it was a team that we thought that was fairly bad and made a lot of mistakes. So it was like ripe for basically a mock test or some kind of quiz. And we handed this VOD to we looked at 50 resumes and example work, and we picked out 10 coaches from that, and we sent them the test, and then we waited for to accept the test and then submit something back a few days later.
The idea is they watch the VOD and they break it down and give you a report or something.
And Kasaurus, he literally submitted the most detailed, thorough examination I could possibly think of. He must have spent so much time on it, but we were super impressed with his diligence and his attention to detail. And so we picked him up, and then we picked up Danny, who worked with Team Canada recently. He's 15 or 16. I think he's 15 still. But he's basically our data analyst. He's also a highly rated player on the ladder. So yeah, Danny does a lot of data projects for us, similar to what Roy does for Toronto. So we have it's literally 4 coaches, same kind of thing as what Toronto did. So there's a lot in common between our two teams from a coaching.
And you have like the one-on-one coach as well with Kazoris, right?
So Kazoris is basically responsible for one-on-one coaching. Yep.
I mean, I think it's really cool that, both of you guys have such, it sounds like thorough, ideas of how you're going to be running the team, and you've divided responsibilities. It seems pretty well. Do you guys have like sports psychs or anything else that's going to be helping out the team?
Yes. So right now we have a sports psychiatrist psychologist we're looking at. We have to actually find one right now that we're interviewing that's a native Korean speaker, because we find that it's kind of hard when you get one that has to work to a translator, mainly because there's some stuff that gets lost in the translation, mainly because sometimes they're not comfortable when you have to go through a translator. And we're also looking at a personal trainer for our players, because we've just recently finished hiring our the team chef and all that.
Okay. So since you said that when you picked up Bishop...
Wait. Are you getting a sports psych or anything, Brad?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. Actually, the same exact things as what Jay just said. We have a team chef, a sports psychologist, and what was the last one? Personal trainer. Good. Yes, we're working on that. And we also, I guess I should mention, we have a in-house translator. So we have somebody living with the team who does full-time translation work for us. We do have 3 Korean players. So even though our sports psych doesn't speak Korean natively, we have a person around all the time to do translation. So Dongmin Jiang has been incredibly awesome for us so far.
Excellent.
Yeah. Our house manager is the translator, and our team chef also doubles as a translator. So we technically have 2 translators, and if he has to, Bishop will translate, but he generally is Dennis's or Baroy's personal translator.
So, right. I mean, you guys, you're an all-Korean team, though, so the translation is less necessary. Right. I mean, it's basically your coaching staff that needs the translation. And considering Bishop is fully bilingual and he's the one working directly with Baroy, then it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, it's only really for like when they have to work with content team and with like interviews and stuff like that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay. So since you said like Bishop was one of the first hires, and then it was even part of picking him up was like his philosophy on how he put together a team, what sort of vision he had for the squad, etc. Does that mean that the team that you ended up with, did Bishop play a large role in picking these players? Because obviously there's like the core elements of the O2 Ardent team people might have seen in Korean contenders, but then aside from that, it's pieces from around the Overwatch League. I mean, some of them big names, like I'd actually say from the outside, one of the big steals looks like getting Neko, for example.
Yeah,
for sure. A lot of people thought he was very good on the Uprising, so I assume people are going to speculate that's something to do with he was quite vitriolic towards the Uprising after leaving, so people would imagine he was probably Krusty's boy in that sense. You had a couple of other players who've been around like Envy, but aside from that, it was these players from Korea where I have to say, of the Korean teams, even though O2 Ardent was a good team in the Korean contenders, they weren't the ones that ever got any of the fanfare. That was like Element Mystic and Runway and Kongdu Panthera. This was actually the team I always thought went under the radar. So was this Bishop's doing, like he wanted these players?
What was interesting is that, so of the original lineup that Bishop envisioned, Envy and Neko was on it. But the O2 Ardent guys were not originally. It was just that during the trials process and during the scouting process, obviously, many things happen, especially with teams bidding and possibly original teams bidding when they should not be bidding. And that's all I'll say on that. And I will leave it at that.
This guy's got such a weird take on subtlety, doesn't he, Monty? Like his thing is to say it and then just go, but I might not be saying that.
For those people who don't know what he's referring to, because some people might be confused about bidding when they shouldn't be bidding. What he's saying, I'll translate this, is that there was an exclusive signing window for new teams. And this signing window lasted a month in the fall of last year. Yes. Where there was a signing window that opened up, and for that month, only expansion teams could sign players.
Yes.
And so this is some spice that is teams that should not have been able to sign players in that signing window may have been making under the table offers.
Well, that's the key thing.
When the signing table ended and when the signing window for the current teams opened up.
Again, just because obviously, like, I'm very concerned, about how people take our words very seriously. I just want to make clear, we're not implying that any team in the Overwatch League who was already an established team made an actual offer that was a real offer that would have been, like, could have held up in court, written or verbal.
Absolutely not. No.
All I'm saying is I'm sure some teams probably said, like, oh, good luck with your free agency. I was thinking actually of building out your room, for maybe the next season, whoever's staying there. So whoever was there probably get, like, the balcony room as well. But anyway, that might not be you. So good luck with the free agency. And, and the whole point isn't, Monty, anyone can imply things, but the key is just not to say the official thing.
I'm not saying anything happened, but I'm saying something may have happened. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those mysteries.
Yeah. More than once.
Yeah, it's just a mystery.
Yeah. But, so, okay. That meant you couldn't get some of the players, perhaps, that you had in your sites?
Yes, and it may have wasted a lot of my time, possibly, because let me just say weeks of my time, and which is great. But, we did, you roll with the punches, obviously, as an expansion team. It's just one of those things you do. And we kept rolling with the punches as trials rolled along. And we actually lucked out because O2 Ardent was one of those teams that just slipped under the radar. People forgot that they got second in Season 1 contenders. Granted, they overperformed. They may have overperformed in Season 1 because dive meta, they were very good in dive. That was a team that was very good in dive. But they did get second in Season 1.
It is critical to mention that in that season that they had one massive peak because they actually lost more than half their games in the group stage and then peaked super hard in those playoffs and then got smashed in the finals. So there was like a several week period where they were very good, and then the rest of the time they were pretty mediocre.
Yes, and then in Season 2, in the group stages, what people forget is they had the same record as Runaway did in Season 2. They went 4-0 in their stage, in their groups, just as Runaway did in their groups. And then they fell short in the playoff stages. So they were like basically an under-the-radar group. And then we basically found that they were just, nobody was bidding on them. They were just overlooked, and they did fantastic during trials.
So when we talk about them too, like there's obviously, based on their peaks, there's a potentially very high upside if you can get them to perform consistently at that level, perhaps with better infrastructure. Is that kind of the thinking?
Yeah, that's pretty much how generally our coaching staff felt, that if they had a better coaching structure around them and quite possibly just better supports with them, and then just a better off tank with them. So it was overall, we were very confident if we got the core of that team, as we felt the best core that we got, which was basically Yakpong, Stellar, and Ivy. And it's very interesting about how there's if you read Reddit, which sometimes is a terrible idea to read Reddit, and
depends if you want to feel good about yourself. I mean, it's great for my self-esteem. I always feel like a fucking genius after I've read that. So.
There's this thing on Reddit about why did Toronto Defiant pick Stellar over Climax now, and Bishop actually kind of talks about it, and he kind of like throws shade at Ivy at the same time, because Ivy mechanically is a very gifted flex DPS, and he kind of like says it in thing where Ivy is a very simple-minded dude, and he's not trying to say it bluntly, but Ivy is very one-minded when he plays. He just wants to just go, and he doesn't really think when he's playing. And it's just how it is. He's just But but the way Stellar plays is Stellar is a very cerebral player. He thinks a lot. He calms very well. Stellar is a guy that would read Reddit, and if he reads stuff about himself on Reddit, he'll doubt himself and he'll play worse because of it. He's one of those type of players, but he is very intelligent. Now, Climax is just like Ivy, and we couldn't afford two players that were just like that. Like, Climax is mechanically more gifted than Ivy, but he's the same way. He's one-minded, and he just doesn't think either. So that's basically the real reason why Stellar got picked over Climax.
I can only imagine, actually, that the general managers in the Florida Mayhem are like, shit, we left all these pieces on the table. These players were available, you say? Fuck, I didn't think this through. But wait a minute, we did get GC Busan players, right? Checks his notes. The bad ones. Yeah, anyway, that was just a completely unrelated flame towards Florida Mayhem there, because they're not in the room, so it's easier, right? It's less uncomfortable for everyone. What about on your team then, Brad? Like, what was the philosophy? Because it's funny you mentioned before, like you actually brought up the example of the Philadelphia Fusion. Your team seems to have gone that route. Like you picked up all these disparate parts that some of them have no connection, you know. So what was the thinking on this team?
Well, I mean, you did get a few players from Element Mystic, which has typically done super well in contenders. And you know, we'll get to like. So,
but I mean, no one was thinking when Element Mystic was in the finals, like, what would they be like if you put Defran on this team? Like, you know, these were not ideas being floated, Monty.
So you talked earlier about, you know, you learned something about like having a strong tank core. So you did take the tanks from Element Mystic. So that's Pokpo and Dako. So what was the thinking when you were looking at these guys?
Well, those guys specifically, I mean, you know, what we did is we really tried to focus not too much on the end results, like who won the finals, who even made it to the finals, like what was their record. Like, yeah, you put a little bit of stock into that, but what we really tried to do was to pull up the match VODs and not so much focus on the overall strategy of the team and whether or not they were implementing a proper strategy to like win the match or whatever. We tried to look at like sort of the micro decisions of each player, right? Like, you know, what does Pokpo's footsies look like in a neutral game? Like, what kind of decisions does Dako make? How does he use his matrix, right? Like, when does he peel? When does he go in? Stuff like this. And so we really just sort of like frame by frame went through a lot of VODs. And we were super impressed with Dako in particular, but also Pokpo's like progress. Like, we felt that his Reinhardt had a lot of flaws, but that his Winston was stellar. We thought his flaws on Reinhardt were fixable. It seemed to be more like a team strategy, the way he was playing it, that we thought was like very correctable. So I guess at the end of the day, what we really went for was like, if you were to put this player alone into a team, what kind of decisions would they make? How mechanically gifted are they? We took like a very like, we kind of really believe in talent, and then we think that like we can coach the bad parts away. So this was sort of the approach we took, and Doc.
So you were generally going individually for the best players you could get at each role.
Yeah, which is how we ended up with a international roster like Philly. I imagine they did a very similar process. So,
okay.
So the other players that you got outside of the Korean players, so Erster was coming from actually China contenders on Lucky Future, where you know the majority of that roster was Korean effectively, and they were winning over in contenders China. So Erster's a projectile DPS player primarily.
He's actually a player also, I'll just reference, where I just did an episode of Watch the Overshow with Sideshow and Yiska, and they were actually, I think it was Sideshow said that he's actually like low-key hyped by people inside the scene, Erster, like they think he's like some really sick player.
Yeah, so especially Yiska. Especially Yiska. Yiska's like a huge Erster fan.
Is he the one who's in love with him? It might have been him. He's one of the two. Yeah. It's hard to keep a track of people's biases, but...
I'm hugely in love with Erster. Yeah, he's a projectile player, and actually... So there was like one of the hardest things to find during the signing window, like for all teams, was to find like the Godflex DPS player, right? Like the one DPS player that you thought, okay, I can use him on Tracer, and I can use him on Pharah, and I can use him on Genji, and I can like you can use him anywhere, right? Like the Floodas of the world and the Bird Rings, and you know all these guys that were hyped as like big time, the Carpes of the world, like big time MVP players in season 1. You kind of wanted to find that for your team heading into season 2, because the metas were ever shifting and unpredictable, right? And you don't know what you need, but you know that you might need to do mid-map swaps where you literally can't change the player. All you can change is the hero or the playstyle, and you'd want a player that can do all of that. This is why players like DK went up to like such huge, insane numbers, right, on bidding. And we thought that Erster was like in the same category. So this is you know what we saw in Erster. I think there's some other players that are stepping up this year that might potentially fit into that category. Like I think Dante, for example, on Houston Outlaws has really been improving his hero pool. He's no longer like just like a Tracer Genji Sombra player. I think he's like branching out.
Carpe, even that was pretty valuable though in season 1. I mean, how many people played those 3 champions, right? He was pretty good on. Oh, he was pretty good on. He was actually one of the better parts of the Shock in the early days, right?
So last year when I was on the Shock, Dante, when he was not scrimming and he was just playing on his own, he would play all kinds of hero. And I asked him about it, and he said that he had a goal last year that by this coming year, he would be like a flex DPS player. So he set that goal for himself like 6 or 7 or 8 months ago, and he's grinded those heroes out. So I hope it works out for him. But I think in general, these players are hard to find and highly valued, and Erster is our version of that. So
I do question somewhat, like, I understand why you would want that, obviously, because it allows you the maximum amount of versatility with the same roster, so you're not changing comms. But there are other philosophies, I think. I think the Gladiators really epitomize sort of like the DPS by committee approach, where they're very smart about which players they're putting in a specific map and how they're rotating these players in and out. And that showed that they had a lot of success with that last season.
They did, but I think that even they see the value in it in the sense that they're the one out for DK, who is widely considered by most teams to be like a flex DPS. So
we'll see. I mean, I think, like I said, I keep saying DK, I think is a little bit overrated for the price that was paid and the bidding war that ensued. Yeah. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. What about, so you have a Russian player, Enlair or Lair.
Okay. I mean, to be fair, you can't tell the guy who signed like Sinatra and Super to the Shock, like, yeah, you agree with me, right? These fucking players getting bidded way up and then signed when they haven't really proven anything yet. Who would do a thing like that? Like, he's not with you on that one, is he, Monty? Like,
hey, there haven't been those things happening, at least with Atlanta this season.
True, that's true.
So you do have Enlair, who, as I understand, is a former CS:GO. He's been banned from CS:GO, right?
Yeah, I think so.
To be fair, so's Baby Bay, so obviously he's going with that little trend there. He picks up banned players from other games, you know. I bet fucking Steele's phone was ringing off the hook, wasn't it? He's like, I don't play it anymore. No, honestly, I don't. Like, anyway. So yeah, I've never heard of this player. So was it? I assume he's just been banned on like just a fun account or something, right? He wasn't a pro player, right?
If he was, I don't know. I think he attended a LAN or two. So definitely he was in the circuit. The Russian circuit or whatever, apparently
it was years ago. Apparently, got banned in like the end of 2014. So this isn't something
right
recent.
Now. I just looked it up. It was a while ago, and he was very young at the time. Like he would be 15 years old back then.
Yeah,
16.
Yes. It's not supposed to be a black cloud. Anyway, he played with you on last night's Leftovers, right? So this is one of the players that you wanted from that roster, I take it.
So he stood out to us. He was actually the first player that we signed, he had issues. He struggled with comms. He was not the best communicator. He struggled with.
For context, by the way, this is a Russian player, so obviously he's having to speak in English, a second language. So not a ridiculous scenario to expect.
Exactly. He has a problem with tunneling, similar to what Jay was talking about with Ivy. But he's mechanically insane. His tracking is insane. His Widow in particular was insane. And one of the things that we felt we needed, just in case, GOATs turned out not to be the meta at any point in Season 2, was to have a competent Widow player because Widow is such an important part of any DPS 2-2-2 oriented meta, right? So, this was like an easy thing for us where it's like he showed a lot of improvement. He took coaching well. And he's mechanically insane, so if we can just get him to play smarter and communicate better, we think that he could be a very, very valuable member of the team. The other thing is like, just from my own experience on Shock, I watched certain young players, Dante, I'll mention Dante again, but many players really, the younger players, their communication improved dramatically over the course of the season. So they started out being very timid, very mute, not really having a voice. And by mid-season, late season, they're talking like a grown-up and communicating what they think and feel effectively. So I do think that communication in particular is one of those things that can be coached up. It can be learned. It just comes with maturity. And so, if this is like the biggest thing preventing you from being like a top-level player, that's not usually something that I shy away from. So.
Okay. Right, before we move on a little bit and make it a bit more general so everyone can talk, you have to address the Defran aspect. Like, Danish player. You can't exactly just like talk about everyone in the line except the most controversial player in the whole team. So come on, give us the thinking behind this move.
Which is also like, to be fair, Brad knows Defran probably better than anybody, having picked him up on Selfless. So, you know, like clearly everybody knows Defran is just an extraordinarily mechanically gifted player. That has had multiple incidents of, you know, even quitting the Atlanta Reign for 24 hours.
Someone make a movie. It's called 24 Hours. Obviously, it starts with him saying, "Right,
that was a great 24 hours. I love those 24
hours." And then, no, I've got it the wrong way around, haven't I? Obviously, this movie would start with him like coming back through the door, and you're like, "You? I never thought I'd see you here again." And then it immediately scrolls back to the beginning of the movie, which is when he leaves. And it's like, "I'll never darken my door again. Get out! I always said you were toxic." And then like whatever happens in those 24 hours is the 2-hour movie. Obviously, you know, he goes through a whole spiritual journey. He like, you know, discovers like how to be non-toxic and so like I don't know what it would be, but you get the purpose. I mean,
like just coming from my perspective, I was actually amazed the first time Defran got banned, because I've probably never seen anybody do more simultaneous ban-worthy things at, you know, in that one instance with the like Torbjorn and the throwing and like the ISIS references and the hentai games. Like, it was just
very well. Yeah, you're right.
It was just like the fucking, like, it just like went so deep.
What I appreciated about it though, Monty, was like, as you say, even as he was throwing and doing blatantly like, you know, like stuff that obviously would get you banned from a game, he also had to sort of let you know that that's what he was doing as well to ensure that he got banned. Like, he had to make it clear that his intention was to do exactly that. It couldn't be misread. Don't imagine that, you know, he's from a different culture, he just doesn't know any better. It's almost like he just held up like a signed affidavit, like, I know that what I'm doing should definitely get me banned. And when he was banned, he was like, what the fuck? What is this oppression? I'm banned. This is bullshit, man. I didn't even do anything. It's like, come on.
Well, also, like, obviously he's a very successful streamer, and I'm sure he's making a lot of money streaming as well. So I'm curious about his motivation to actually come back into the professional scene, considering that, you know, he does have like another career option that would, you know, potentially be less stressful than being in Overwatch League.
Sure. I mean, where do I start?
Okay, I've got one question. Here's the way we could start it, right? So, as Monty alluded to, people are aware this is a skilled player, and it's someone who definitely, if he, like, put it this way, if he'd have just unbound all of the keys to type, he obviously would probably be in the Overwatch League anyway. Like, it's clearly a player who could have been. But the question I think someone who saw Overwatch League Season 1 would say would be, if you look at some of the players, the most ridiculous example is obviously XQC, but there was other players who got banned for whatever, boosting, any sort of things. Obviously, certain other things got people banned. Those could potentially hamstring their entire team, like, especially if they were a very key player. So even if the player's good, people are probably going to think, like, you're not concerned about that as like as a potential issue that could happen?
Well, so I have experience with Defran, and first of all, I think he's an awesome person. You know, like, I don't think, like, for everything that he did, you know, to get himself banned, you know, like, if you ever just watch his stream or watch him play, like, he never really, like, bullies people or criticizes other people. He usually takes responsibility for the loss on himself, and even if he doesn't, he's not mean to the person who he thinks is responsible, right? So he's not like a mean-spirited person, which was, like, if he was, would have never had him on the team, you know? So the fact that he is like not that type of person is like the first qualification to like be considered like to be able to join the Reign, right? The second thing is like from his time on Selfless, he was there for what, like 4.5 months or something? I don't know, something like this. But for like the first like 3.5 months, he worked harder probably than anybody else in the team. Like, he literally woke up, focused on Overwatch like 15 hours a day, right? Like, he only stopped for smoke, bathroom, and pizza, you know? And I saw
the
like
three essential building blocks of a healthy life. Yeah.
So he put in, like, he was just entirely dedicated to winning, and it showed in his play and in everything else. And so I know that, like, basically from experience, that Defran is somebody who if he's not at 0% throwing games, playing Torb, and jumping off the map, then he's at 110%, which is, you know, if you're in the Overwatch League and you're taking it seriously and you can sustain for that period of time, then you're going to have one of the best teammates in the world. So that is what we're hoping to get out of the Fran this season, is that 100%, start to finish. He's done certain things to show his dedication. Like, I don't know if you guys probably missed this, but, he started doing drinking water only, like maybe 2 months ago. Okay. Whereas when he was on Selfless, it was quite literally Coke, nonstop Coke all the time. Coca-Cola,
right? Yes. Don't clip that. Don't clip that. It wasn't Coke all the time. You know what he meant. Come on. Listen, he's not that bad anymore, guys. He's really cleaned his act up. It's water now,
So anyways, we just think that like the Fran, if he's in like a healthy environment and he gets along with his teammates and we're all pushing in the same direction together, that he will be a valuable member of this team. It's on us to create the conditions for him to succeed, and then it's on him to take it up.
To be fair, when you described that setting in the past that he was in when he was on Selfless, I actually sort of can understand the atmosphere where this behavior came from then, because it's kind of like the unruly kid who's too hyperactive, right? He's eating pizza, he's just playing video games all day, he's like drinking Coke non-stop, he's got all that sugar rush going, What do you expect? He's not going to play well with others. Listen, I could have told you that for my own life. If only I'd known these things as a boy. If only I could have switched to the waters, Monty. Where might I have been? Who knows?
You still only drink energy drinks.
I do. So, I slip the occasional glass of water between them as a chaser,
But yeah, I think everybody's really excited about Defran, and I don't think. I just don't think most people don't think of him as a malicious person. People think of him as just a phenomenally talented player that they want to succeed. He is just sort of self-defeating at times, and nobody likes seeing that.
Yeah, nobody likes to see somebody self-destruct, for sure. I will say this: we did build the whole team. So Enler was the first signing we did. Defran was the last signing, right? Like we built the whole team. We built the whole team on the idea that if for some reason he's just happier not competing and happier being a streamer or whatever, that this is an option available to him that doesn't like completely hamstrung the team. I wanted to make sure that we had a fully functional team with or without him. Do I think we can be better with him? Absolutely. But yeah, that's where
it also puts less pressure on him too, because he's not coming in with the weight of the team on his shoulders, as it were.
Right.
Okay, right. One of the things we touched on earlier, but because we went into the specifics of each of your teams and some of the players, we didn't really talk about it as a more general concept, but I wanted to ask about it, was what I alluded to of like when you're putting together a team, an area I actually have a lot of sympathy for people who are coaches or general managers is the idea of, like I said, of like, I mean, at the moment, we still don't really know because the meta changes which roles you want your best players to play in or what types of players you even want for those particular roles. So what has been the challenge in that respect? Like, how do you either address that or how do you counteract it? I mean, you kind of alluded to it there, Brad, right, with the angle of like get a DPS who also plays something you're envisioning could be in the meta next if it's going to come. So have you come up with any concepts of how you can resolve those issues? You as well, Jay, just jump in. Anyone who has anything on this?
Well, generally for us, we made sure that obviously right now the meta is goats. Even on PTR, technically the meta is still pretty much goats. It might change as people play more.
It is worth noting that most of the teams only started practicing this week, and some of them still aren't here yet. So
it is very true. Obviously, it's just from the first few days of PTR when people played it, they still thought that goats was strong. So, it just takes a little time to figure out what is going to be best. Obviously, people have tried quad DPS and, they had fun with that. But
sure.
One thing to, a lot of times in the current meta, what people have noticed is that the hit scan player will tend to generally play Zarya. Just because of the tracking.
Sure,
and,
yes.
That the tracking tends to, and then obviously the flex DPS will tend to play the Bukita. So generally that's what you have to be mindful of. That if it does go back to being, DPS players being able to play DPS characters again, you got to have those guys be able to play on, the characters you signed them to be, not tanks.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to build a roster that we felt was meta agnostic, and I think a lot of teams did this, and which is why the flex DPS role was like so coveted, is because it allows your team to be a lot more meta agnostic. But at the end of the day, you can't plan for every scenario. Last season, I failed with the shock in the sense that another mistake that I made was I thought I could make it through stage 1 and 2 without having 2 players that were fully comfortable on Tracer Genji. That is to say, I had only 1 player that was fully comfortable on Tracer Genji, and it's Dante, right? Baby Bay was like much more comfortable on the Widow, the Soldier, the McCree, like the ranged hit scans, right? And so double flanker ended up being a big part of the meta, and this made us lose quite a handful of games having Baby Bay play the Genji, which was not like his comfort pick. So I think a lot of teams wanted to build a meta-agnostic roster this season based on how many meta changes we went through last season, right? Everything from double flanker to Widow-based stuff to like Orisa Junkrat to Mercy, then to there was a lot. And so very few teams like went for like a lot of teams went for more players than they had to get. They didn't go for the minimum roster size, and for the ones that did go for minimum roster size, I think they went for players that showed like a lot of flexibility. The one thing that has changed a lot between season 2 and season 1 is that more players have gotten more comfortable and more. Nobody's really a one trick anymore. Most players are at least comfortable on 3 or 4 heroes for the most part. Whether they're truly exceptional in those other heroes, you can come a lot of times down to style, like stylistically. What makes a Ryan player a good Ryan player is hard for them to be a good Winston player, but it's still learnable to play the different styles. It's just like not their natural instincts. So I do think that like the meta, it became a little easier to build the team this season in this that players. So yeah.
I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, from season 1 to season 2, the minimum roster now is 8 players. I think for season 1, the minimum roster was 6. I think the league made that so that teams are able to bring in subs to be mindful for. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to be mindful also for meta changes, but yeah, maybe for what you're subtly alluding to.
Well, obviously, actually, your 2 teams are 2 of the teams that did only sign the 8. You didn't sign the extra plus. So is that also part of it? Like, was there a logic there of like, we'll get whatever we need in whatever a stage or 2 if we don't have it now? Was that a reason why? Did you really specifically want a small team and not have many subs? What was the philosophy on that?
Yeah, I don't know if you want. Oh, no, you can go first.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So we wanted to go first with the 8 because we were very confident with our 2 subs for now. But we are keeping it open, keep an open mind as the season goes along.
Yeah, that is another key change between season 2 and season 1. That in season 1 there was a roster, right? In stage 1 last season you could not introduce new players, right? So if you have one of the best Lucio players in the world on your team and suddenly it's a Mercy meta, you're stuck, right, for the entirety of stage 1. But this season, that is not the case. If you end up signing somebody that you think is not well suited to the meta and you think you have a hole in the roster, you can immediately go hit the contenders market or whatever and try to find somebody to fill the gap. So I think that is one of the reasons why the roster sizes didn't go full blown this time, is because there's that open signing window for the entirety of the regular bit, right? Maybe not all.
It's until like the end of stage 3 or like sometime. I think it's within the middle of stage 3 or something like that.
Okay.
I think it's also a lot of the teams. I really appreciate the fact that there are 2-way contracts now with players that, or with teams that do have contenders roster. Gator's on a 2-way contract for you, right, Brad?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so you have an opportunity to sort of move players up and down between the rosters as necessary, and it's also interesting because, as you're saying, many players have learned to play more heroes, like have a broader hero pool, generally speaking, which makes sense when they're able to dedicate all of their time to Overwatch League and they have the infrastructure around to help them develop their hero pools. But a lot of teams have actually gone down in size. Obviously, we saw a lot of experiments with London and Philadelphia, both of which had 12 players heading into the start of last season, who have now dramatically pared their rosters down either during the season in London's case or after the season in Philadelphia's case. And it seems like most teams want to hover around like 8 or 9 players currently. That, you know, and even then maybe with 1 or 2 of those that are on two-way contracts.
Unless you're the NYXL, then you just say, actually, we just only need 10 players because we've got all the good players. So, you know, that whole roster building thing? Yeah, Thorin, the thing is, what I tried to do is just get the best players in every role and just put them all on my team. So, yeah, that's how I did it. So, that's why we got someone in NYXL.
Who just like is collecting all of the DPS and Overwatch onto one roster.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that it's easier to manage 8 people than it is to manage 12, right? Like that's just easier from a coaching standpoint.
I mean, I would make the obvious joke, like, which would you rather have, 8 DeFrans or 10 arcs from the NYXL? You know? Anyway, it's just a side joke. Keep going, Brad. I take the general principle, yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's worth noting that the 2 teams that made the finals last season both started out with big rosters, and that essentially represented for them like a 5 or 6 managed policy, right? It's like, okay,
sure,
got 12 shots at finding the 6 best players that have the best chemistry to take the stage for the playoffs and pop off, right? And so, you know, for all of those intangibles, right? Like you find a mechanically skilled player, but they simply don't seem to connect with these other 5 guys, and they think about the game differently, and they always want to make a play that's different than what the rest of the group goes for. Having a bigger roster, being able to pare it down throughout the season, does have some advantages. So I would say there's definitely an element of risk to what Atlanta and Toronto have done in choosing to go with 8, but there's also upsides in the sense that, like, if you do feel that you've built up the right infrastructure and the right coaching and the right filled all the gaps with those 8, then there's less room for drama and dissatisfied players, and you've got the 2-way contracts now to keep people warm, people from languishing on the bench and stuff. So there's a lot of things about this season where the 8-man roster with the 2-way contracts makes a bit more sense.
I am more.
Oh, sorry, go on, Jay.
Yeah, with the way Overwatch League contracts set up, I am more comfortable starting small and building onto than paring down. Generally, yeah.
That was one thing I wondered about from season 1, because I forget what the actual status was, but like, you technically, if you'd signed someone, you couldn't like remove them from the roster and have another spot, right? They were still just signed for the whole year. How did that work?
You can still remove them, but you have to pay them for the full length of the contract.
I see. It's like guaranteed money. Okay.
Yep.
I guess the analogy, Monty, since Brad picked the example of London Spitfire there, where they were sort of like, you know, figuring out over the season very noticeably, like, which players do we use? I think for them, they must have used the same philosophy that the optician uses when you go there. Because, you know, the system he uses when he puts those like lenses in is even when he shows you a really good one, he purposely shows you a bad one right after and goes, better or worse? And then when you go, well, worse, like, he gradually finds his way to the right optician. Because obviously there was times when I would be going, yes, great lineup, and then they'd go, how about we just bring this guy again? It's like, really? Hagapin again? Well, let's give it another go. Let's see how it goes. I'm going worse on this one, right? What about this one? Better or worse? I told you already. Like, just answer my questions, please, sir. It's gradually getting there. So in the end, you know what? It did work. They won the league. So their method wins. I can't criticize it now.
I think that is a very good analogy. The London glass.
Okay, what about this then? Since you alluded before about you saw like a key role, Brad, as being this flex DPS player, particularly foreseeing how the meta could swap. If we look at the other teams in the league then, which teams do you think have done a very good job in this respect? Like, who've kind of followed your lead on this one and taken that as a key point, do you think? Who would you pick?
Oh, geez. You make me pull up the rosters now. I don't know. Well, Gladiators is the obvious one, right?
Sure.
With DK. Let's see here. Well, Houston with Dante. Philly has both Eco and Carpe, right? Paris has...
They have all sorts of stuff, don't they?
I mean, I don't think Paris has really... like, some people would argue that Soon fills that role. I'm not sure that I agree. So Paris is kind of like maybe not quite there on this flex DPS thing. New York has Libero, and I mean,
They have everything.
Flower,
we know that.
yeah.
It's unfair.
They have Nene, who is like not really a flex DPS. However, Nene has been playing goats. Like goats is currently a big part of the meta. Nene has been playing goats and contenders prior to OWL, right? Like for the entire offseason. So they have like one of the most experienced like Zarya players and Nene. London has both Prophet and Birdring, who can flex very well.
Birdring can even flex between a world-class DPS player and a shit-tier guy just hiding behind the name Birdring for a couple of splits. Sorry to break that to you, Monty, there. I know it's one of your favourites. He is indeed very flexible, I have to say.
Ivy has shown pretty good flexibility. Toronto, but I won't say Jay. And then Washington, I guess, who they're looking to is maybe Stratus. Maybe it's Corey. Maybe it's Addo. Like basically Washington has players that are like they don't have a true flex DPS, but they have a lot of DPS players that are comfortable in like a lot of different heroes, where between the three of them, they cover a lot of bases.
Okay. What about this then? To open it up so anyone can comment these ones. What about if we look, okay, let's first of all go to the expansion teams. Like, which expansion teams do you think look good? Like, who do you think did a good job recruiting, or they look like they've got a very good lineup on paper? What would be your take? Anyone on this? You can come in as well, Monty. Who's caught your eye?
I mean, I guess I can go first. I think if we look at the highest upside to probably some of these expansion teams, that I would say Hangzhou, if they can get over the language issues between their Chinese and Korean players, probably has the highest like skill ceiling, I would say. I think they're probably going to be like the Philadelphia Fusion of this season, in that Philly did start better than we thought, but I think that they'll probably start slower and then ramp up the longer the season goes on. I mean, Titans are an easy one because they're already an established roster with synergy coming over from Runaway. I think that Titans will probably be and they're practiced, obviously very well practiced with the GOATS meta, sure. Which is it is seeing less play than it did from the stuff that I've seen on PTR, the scrims that I've seen on PTR. It does seem like it is less dominant than it was, but it's still a major part of the strategy, and we'll see if that dies off the more teams get practice on the PTR patch. But we'll still see a good amount of it, I think, to be sure. It just won't be completely dominant like it was. But that said, any team that is practiced within the GOATS meta, or players who are practiced within the GOATS meta, like Nene that Brad was just mentioning, should be doing pretty well, and that should include the Runaway roster. So I think those are probably the two that have, I think, the highest upside, I would say. But it's hard to tell, especially with a lot of these players, like with Atlanta and Toronto going onto new rosters, what exactly that's going to look like.
If you don't want to jump on that angle, what about this then? Are there any players on some of the expansion lineups that you thought were very good, maybe you were pursuing, or you had in mind as scouted and they just went to some of these teams?
I like, there's a bunch of players I like, but I will say, if I look at expansion teams, I think Titans will do very well initially because of synergy, and the current meta is very big on synergy. Hangzhou will probably do very well. I'm going to exclude Toronto just because of bias, obviously, but I think ATL. I think Brad will do pretty well.
This is where he now goes, well, I'd obviously have to say that Toronto Defiant team looks like a hell of a team to me. Is this some prearranged agreement before the show?
No, I'd say I'd put those three maybe doing well initially of the expansion teams, and then but players, I don't know about expansion teams in general, but because there's a lot of players that entered OWL Season 2 in general. Of the players, okay, I really would have liked Jaesun, I think would have been fantastic in general. Jaesun, I think, is going to be a superstar in Season 2. I think IDK is close to Jaesun if you go by main supports. There's main supports in general in North America and Europe is very few and far between. It's one of those rare roles that are just hard to fill.
I will say for that one, by the way, that is also a name that Yiska mentioned a few months back on one of the episodes, where if anyone wants to know how tough the life of this guy is going to be, it should be, you know, you're a new player, you come in, people judge you like that. People are literally hailing this guy that he's so much of a saviour, shot caller, support god that he's going to turn around the Seoul Dynasty and rescue a bunch of their players who obviously had terrible season ones and make them a good team again. So he's got quite a weight upon his shoulders. I'm certainly interested to see if he can do it. The hype sounds pretty sick.
We brought him into our tryouts, and we were very impressed. We think he has great shot calling ability and good ult tracking. So I think he'll do very well.
And
a good shot caller on the Seoul Dynasty. Imagine that.
and I think Monty's wife did very good with guard. That is a smart pick when
how dare you? We're allowed to talk about that now. Yeah, my mistake.
Yeah, when the meta changes a bit and Sombra comes into play a lot, that guard is going to be very, very relevant because he's probably the best Sombra player in all of Korea. So that was very smart of London. And then I would say DM over Decay. I'd probably say, of hit scans from Korea. I think Gladiators may have overbid because I think DM would probably out Widow Decay maybe. I think Decay may be a little overhyped. I think he is very flexible. I think he can play both flex and hit scan roles very well, but I think DM would have been a better pick. But yeah.
I mean, I do think a good. So I don't want to throw out my prediction for too many teams.
Does one of you need to go and pilot a fucking mech right now or something? What was that sound? What was that sound? Jay, get in the mech. Or Monty has to pilot it again. What was that sound?
I think the kaiju are attacking the Toronto house right now, and he's got to he's got to get in his suit and go fight them.
I think in terms of Widows, since we mentioned DM, I do think if Widow ends up being a big part of the meta, I think Bazzi will do really well on Widow. Phenomenal Widow player, in my opinion. So if it's a Widow-based meta at any point, I think between Gushwain and Bazzi, that Spark will do very well.
I will say this thing about DM because I've seen we trialed DM at one point. And a lot of people don't know is that he doesn't flick. He tracks and he tracks fast as Widow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've noticed that's one thing coming from Counter-Strike. I was amazed that was the style for the sniper, is everyone flicks. Because like some players do that with the AWP in Counter-Strike, but actually the traditional like bread and butter of a sniper in Counter-Strike is tracking aim. Like the idea is you want to make sure your hit rate is high. You don't want to just flick constantly. To be fair though, the obvious difference is in the Widowmaker, like you can move all the time and you can just fire over and over again. So there's a slight nuance there, but that's an interesting detail certainly. By the way, I'm just glad. I'm just fucking glad. And you know what? I'll go ahead and say it now to ruin every desk segment Bren is ever on. I'm just glad fucking DM obviously doesn't play on the Philadelphia Future because we all know the trash tier fucking DPS duo jokes they would be making with Carpe and DM Monty. Like, I don't know if I can already. Like, I've already ruined all your material for season 2 there, Bren. Like when the Shanghai Dragons play against them, you can't use that, mate. Everyone link to this video and say he copied it from me because he's going to do it. I guarantee. He's not going to watch the episode. He's going to do it. So when he does, just link back to this and you'll see that I was ahead of it. I read exactly what he was going to do.
So when we talk about DM and we talk about like let's chat about the Shanghai Dragons. So you guys are pretty hot on DM and Shanghai. So I thought coming in, well, the Shanghai Dragons are mega screwed, right? Who is going to want to play for this roster that went 0-40? I thought they were screwed because of that exclusive signing window, because who would be like holding out, waiting for that sick Shanghai Dragons contract at the end of the month, right? You're going to definitely sign with an expansion team if you are good enough. And I thought Shanghai would just be forever in the dumpster because of the process, because there's no reason for anybody to sign when they could just sign with an expansion team instead. And yet, Shanghai has ended up with a pretty good roster somehow.
Especially considering one of the players they let go was Ado, who actually looked like one of the best players in their team. So you would have thought, they were going to be in Shit's Creek.
But they're not. So what are your guys' thoughts on Shanghai? Definitely, they're not going to go 40 right now. They may even crack the playoffs with this roster.
Readers, listeners, just be aware of the context. When you heard Monty say that, the Shanghai Dragons is now almost all Korean. Now you understand his comments. Continue, right? Back into the episode. So, in case anyone thought, it's not the same team at all, obviously. But yeah, go on then.
No, it's not.
What were you going to say, Jay?
I mean, money talks and bullshit walks. I mean, it's a good team. They were embarrassed last season, so they went and they put their money where their mouth is and got one of the best rosters they could buy, possibly. So,
and by the way,
that's the long and short of it, pretty much.
Within the context of what I said before about Ado, to be fair, the one Chinese player they did keep, Dia, he was also one of the best players on that team. Like, those guys actually looked competent at some of the time, right, Monty? It was just you can't just be a DPS player on your own. We found that doesn't work, believe it or not. You die pretty quickly.
I mean, I guess I'd be surprised to see Dia actually starting, even though he is a mechanically good player and was certainly one of the biggest highlights, I think, of their roster last season. I'm just generally surprised by what this team was able to do, because I would have thought that the first step towards them rebuilding would be to hire a coach, but they actually hired their coaching staff, their Korean coaching staff, after they announced all their players. Right. So it really is, it's somewhat confusing to me, the way in which some of these players went about like getting, they did sign the coach first, excuse me, I was wrong about that. So they did actually go out and get Blue Haas, who is the current head coach, after all of their problems last season with retaining a coaching staff. Because remember, they kept like bringing in coaches for trials who would then like leave after 2 weeks, and it was just a giant
I can't blame them.
Dumpster fire.
You know, I'd rather I coached the Shanghai Dragons for 2 weeks, Monty, than for a whole season on my resume. You know?
Well, it was sort of tragic how they would bring in a guest coach and then that person would be like, I can't fix this. Goodbye. I felt bad for the players.
I actually have to say, by the way, massive props to the Shanghai Dragons org for deciding, just because we want to win, we will actually remove nearly all the Chinese players. Like, you would have thought, if people spin the marketing side, well, that's the one thing you'll never do. You know, you have to keep the Chinese players. It's called Shanghai, you know, we want the local fans and stuff, but it's actually a way better strategy to have a winning team and then figure out if you can put some marketable players on it, believe it or not. Who knew?
Who knew?
I think Shanghai is probably a team that's going to be a little meta dependent.
What would be a good meta for them?
Fair Sombra, probably. A Fair Sombra meta, you know, with Ding. One of the best fairs in the world. But I'm a little worried if the meta is based around Genji at all. I'm a little worried about a tank meta for them, like Goats. I say this and Atlanta has not yet scrimmed Shanghai, so everything I'm saying is pure speculation. Right. But I am not huge on this team in the current meta or in some hypothetical metas. I do think they would do really well in the right meta. So I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, luckily, to be fair, as long as they just win any games and have any competent games, that already seems like, wow, what a win. Great job by you guys. Yes, welcome to the league. So I'm starting out with low expectations.
Yeah, I mean, they purchased the team, but they didn't purchase DK, right? Like they left behind the star player in their purchase. So.
Technically, they could go 1-27, and people would probably call that a win.
Well, yeah, that's the real joke, isn't it? They're not going to go 0-40. Format doesn't allow it anymore. Like the lamest punchline of all time. Right?
I'm trying to queue up Monty here for his DK tirade, but
hey, I just don't think that. I think DK is a good player. Don't get me wrong, and I think people are going to be, you know, they're going to hear this. Oh, Monty thinks DK is overrated. That doesn't mean he's not good. It just means
he's not the most valuable player in the Overwatch League, though.
Exactly, and he's getting paid like it, right? So, like, he has to be pretty fucking good to like earn that paycheck, in my opinion. We'll see what he does on the Gladiators. I just don't think he's like quite like he's not Carpe, right? He's not Prophet. You know, he's not like an ultra superstar level DPS player.
Bear in mind, I think Gladiators are willing to pay a certain amount mainly because they had a lot of cash flow from Fisher, probably, and they were just willing to just spend it and just win it, probably.
Okay. Right, what do you guys think about NYXL? Because on the one hand, NYXL clearly had a lot of success in the early stages. Even by the end, I think overall, on average, you have to call them like the team of the year for Overwatch, just when you aggregate all the performances. So they didn't win though. So technically, there's no reason people should think it's like a given conclusion they'll win. But it does seem like they took an already amazing roster and made it even better. Like it's hard to criticize any of the moves they made, right?
I still think they're probably a top 2 team.
Who are we talking about?
At the NYXL.
NYXL, yeah. I think they're still very good. I mean, I think Jonak continues to shine in any meta. He's an all-around player. He can play in dive meta. He can do it all. And I think that just the team as a whole, I think, is better coordinated than most, and they have a lot of synergy coming from Season 1 into Season 2. So if it's a GOATS-based meta where chemistry is important and cohesion is important, and it's all there still. And, if they can carry the same professionalism that they had in Season 2, other than, the memes people make about sandbagging and stuff, but if they can go full throttle, I think they'll do very well, continue to do very well.
Do you think that the loss of Wizard Hyung as a coach and an analyst for the team is going to hold NYXL back at all?
No.
That was fucking quick. I mean,
don't
think about it, Rathan, mate. No! And he never would. And fuck him as well. Why were you so forceful there? What made that come forwards?
Just no. Let's just leave it at that. Just no. I think he's.
Did people overblow that narrative?
I think he's a decent analyst, but they have an entire full coaching staff that really contributed to them. Just he was obviously the most forward facing to the fan base, and that sort of made the fans think he was the reason why they were successful. And
he did also sort of jokingly, repeatedly, overtly imply that he indeed was the godhead of all knowledge within the organisation, which clearly worked to his advantage. Fair play, he got that bag. So
pretty much, and then the rest of the coaches pretty much didn't say anything to the contrary. They just sort of let him run with it. But and pretty much just that's how it goes. If he wants to just keep saying that he is the godhead of that team and the reason they did so well, that more power to him. But
so you're confident in Pavane to replace him fully, then?
Yes, I am very confident that their coaching staff is perfectly fine without him.
And now he's got the chance to prove it, right? Because that talk resulted in what was ostensibly a very fat payday from the Washington Justice. And now he's in the head coaching position, which he wasn't in before because Pavane was serving that role. So this is really his chance to prove himself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, if he was the godhead, now as the head coach, he should be able to do better than them, correct? I mean...
Well, it doesn't really work that way, right? Because he doesn't sound like he has this player.
No, Monty. Has. He was the one telling Jonak how to do all that stuff. Now their team's fucked, but now even better. Washington Justice, not even that good a lineup. Doesn't matter. Probably just immediately turn them into the champions.
I mean, what we can say is that, okay, Washington Justice on paper has a pretty weak lineup, but he should be able to do something at least strategically with this team, right? If he is going to be considered a great head coach.
Well, here's the nightmare scenario, Monty, and this is obviously what will torture Jay, is that he already got all the credit because he spun it up that he was like the main brain behind NYXL, which, as I alluded to before, was like being any class of driver who's driving a Lamborghini and everyone else is in like an old fucking demolition derby car. It's like, you know what, you don't have to, obviously you can't be the worst driver, but you don't have to necessarily be the best driver to keep that car in first pole position. So what I would say is this, the problem is, Monty, now he goes to a lineup that people don't really rate. If this lineup gets good, it just gets even worse. Now he's definitely the godhead, Monty. So at that point, his reputation, like he can, like that old saying, like give a man a reputation as an early riser and he can sleep till noon. So if he succeeds at this one, it's just over for everyone.
I agree. I think that's a really good analogy. Wizard Hyung looked amazing, but now he's got like a Toyota Corolla, and he's got to make that look amazing. So we'll see.
I mean, that's basically what like it. See, for me, and I don't know too much about Wizard Hyung and his
Here we go. Right, he's giving us disclaimers, so it's going to be good. Monty, let the disclaimers come out first. Okay, yeah.
Disclaimer guy. Okay, but I think Wizard Hyung is like his real like exceptional talent, is I could tell like just from a distance, is player coaching. You know, like I think he knows how to make a good player great. And I think he was blessed on NYXL with talented players who could become even better with his coaching. And I don't know that the success or failure of Washington will 100% like determine, like be the jury on Wizard Young as like a player coach.
Sure.
Because he's stepped into a completely different role. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like it's like the move itself was like a bad one. He should have stayed to what he's like really good at. But like you know, so long as they build the right, I don't know. Like,
what are you talking about? He's living the American dream. He came in, you know, he already succeeded anyway, and then he was like, right, time to parlay this success into the most money possible to get right now. I don't even care what the lineup is. The only thing I want to see on paper is this fucking contract. Right, cheers.
So I think if Washington fails, it's just hubris on his part to have thought that he could turn any player into an amazing player as opposed to a talented player into a supremely talented.
Obviously, he heard like. I believe what happened.
So this is like mad shade. You're actually just throwing at the players in that roster, then, which is funny because effectively, like, you're saying that their ceiling is so low that Wizard Young can't fix them.
So I know that's how it comes off. But what I'm really trying to say is that like I don't know like how much. God, I'm digging myself deeper here.
No, we get where you're going. What's the gist? What's the gist of it? Because at the moment, you do sound like they're playing a text-based adventure game, and you're like the evil bad guy who's like, peasant, your skills are not high enough that even Wizard Young could not help you. It's like, come on, they haven't even played yet. What?
I just think that, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you build a team around coachability, right? Coachability, yes. And not raw talent, and you overestimate how much coachability matters, then you can end up with something not great in the end. I think this is my philosophy. My philosophy to building the Reign was to put talent first, coachability second, thinking that you can use the infrastructure and the culture and the environment to like bring the coachability out of people, right? Like find that part of their personality that is coachable and work on it. So I went with like a talent first approach. And I don't know the exact Washington approach, but from the outsider's perspective, it seemed like coachability was a big component of what they went for. Like they picked up players like Stratus, like pretty talented guy, but from what I've seen of him, super coachable, super vocal, like very willing to listen to coach feedback. If this is how they built their roster, right? I don't think that by itself is like good enough. And no matter how good Wizard Young is, like, you know, coachability and taking his feedback, like a player can only take so much of his feedback to improve, right? Like they have to have something inside that they've built up over their history as a pro gamer to like bring them to the highest stage. And, you know, maybe not all of the players on Washington fit that description, but in the Overwatch League, you can't underestimate what it takes to win. So you really need to have 6 or 7 guys pop off on every level, right, to make it to the top. You know, have they built that roster, and can Wizard Young do that? I don't think so, not yet. Go ahead.
I would say as someone who is familiar with Wizard Young, I used to be his boss. I was his manager when he was a coach.
Now it all emerges. Right, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I am very...
Come on.
I am very familiar with Wizard Young. So I will say that he is very concerned about the paycheck. So more so than anything else. So I'll leave it at that. And
I like this. What he does is he's so sort of like low key with the shade. You don't notice he's throwing the shade at first, and then you realize like, fucking hell, all right. Well.
But
by the way, there's nothing wrong with it being about the paycheck. There's nothing wrong.
There is nothing wrong about being about the paycheck, but I think, you know, it will be. I will bite my own words. I will if NYXL fails. And DC is fantastic. I will eat a DC jersey, and you can quote me on that.
Okay. What do you consider failing and success then?
All right. If DC performs better than NYXL over the entire season, I will eat a DC jersey. And you've heard it on your show.
That's good. I like it. I think that the probability of that happening is extraordinarily low, but I appreciate it.
Well, here's the thing, Monty. You have to realize that a bet like that also carries with it implications which aren't directly in the bet, but are fun as well. Like, for example, I'm obviously looking forward to that upset win of the Justice over the Defiant. Like, as soon as that happens, you know, I just want to see Twitter. I want to see, does everyone reference this VOD? Did they link back to it? You know, there's a lot of fun could happen, is all I'm saying.
There's many things that could happen to a clip of this, obviously. This could be easily referenceable for way later on.
I think you're safe. I think you're quite safe. So on that note, though, there have been a lot of power rankings coming out. You guys actually have scrims, a few of them over the last few days as teams have sort of filtered in. Again, it's early. The meta hasn't been set on the PTR. You haven't had that much time to practice. They're fucking scrims, and so who knows? As some teams will be going with what they're comfortable with goats. Some teams will be experimenting more, trying to find a solution to goats. So there's a lot of caveats here. That said, based on what you guys have seen, about each of you give us a team that you think is underrated by the fans and like power rankings right now, and one team that you think is overrated based on what you've seen.
And you're not allowed to pick each other's teams. Just to go ahead and exclude that easy way out that you're both secretly messaging each other.
Can I pick my own team? Can I pick my own team? That's the question.
Of course you've got the arrogance to do that.
I believe the Atlanta Reign are
All right, so why
are they underrated? What do you think people say that, you know, have people not noticed something about a player or some general?
I mean, what is our average position in the power rankings? Like 15 or 16 or something?
I think you're higher than ours because we're fucking in the dumpster rankings also. Right. So it's pretty low.
You guys got some great guests on the show, you know. The heads of the.
To be fair, Monty did book this one. You know. So
great job, Monty.
Just saying.
It's not my fault.
Well, you know, Monty, I ask the bigger names first, and then when they say no, I get on the people who want to come on shows.
I wanted to get new teams in here so that the fans could start to get to know them, right?
Yes. Yeah. At least that's the reason we agreed to say why we set this to correct. So you're right. Yeah, we did reverse engineer a really good reason in the end. So nice to have you here, guys. Really appreciate it. So, what about this then? Yeah. You went with yourself there. What about an overrated team, Brad? Who's overrated?
Monty, you're going to make me throw a shade even though it goes against
That's what happens. That happens. That's what happens when you come on OverSight. The mandatory shade throwing.
Okay. With overrated, I will go with... Jeez. Let's go with Valiant.
That's interesting.
Do people overrate the Valiant? I mean, they're a team that barely made any changes, you know, like they were good, but, you know, they never quite capped out. Do people have a sense that they're going to be very strong?
I think the consensus has been putting them pretty high up, right? And
as a playoff team, I think generally a lot of people have put them there. And I think it's interesting.
I'm actually amazed at that because they lost.
They lost soon, and I think they're transitioning Kareev into being DPS now.
There's doing that again, right? So him and his old mate had another one of those meetings. I guess if Krusty used to meet the Boston players in the bathroom, I guess he was in like a fucking broom closet or something. He's like, I told you, I'm the DPS player, but stop putting me as a sport player. Look, we've got agilities out here. Can I play? Let me have some shine.
Yeah, and interestingly, after Soon left, and the only player they added was Kooky, right? So it's a little weird. Now they do have, so just to be clear, so they do have Izayaki, who actually does have a very good reputation, but we didn't really get a chance to see last season. But with Kareev ostensibly transitioning back into a DPS player, then Izayaki should be the main flex support on this roster, and they kept KSF. So I don't know. Like, it does seem, at least they got Bunny as well. I think that's probably why they thought they didn't need Soon. But it's definitely not a roster unless Izayaki is going to like mega pop off that I would think probably has improved over last season.
I guess the other thing worth pointing out is that any team that if you were to look at last season and say this team was carried by their diva play, right? So I think Valiant with Space, London with Fury, right? Like probably the best D.Va player in the world. If the team was carried by having an exceptional D.Va player, and now D.Va was just nerfed, and armor was nerfed, which is also an indirect nerf to D.Va because she relies on her armor, then the potential of that team just by way of the meta goes down slightly, you know. So there's that as well.
I also like Space was wonderful during the regular season, and he is young, and maybe the playoffs last season will help him get over this, but he was basically non-existent in the playoff match against London. I mean, he didn't have the same effect, and I don't know if it was the nerves or anything that got to him, but his performance when it really mattered wasn't up to his usual caliber.
Fair enough. Right, Jay, who's underrated or overrated? Which are we going with first there?
Well, I'd definitely say we're definitely underrated, but I'd also say I would definitely just
to be fair, if that low down.
We're pretty. Both me and Brad's teams are like way down in the dumpster rankings. So, and Monty is the one that invited us. So, just cheers on you, Monty. But I would say we're definitely underrated because we're really way low now. I don't think we deserve to be that low. But bear in mind, we are both expansion teams, and I give them credit. Unless you're Vancouver, you're not going to be rated pretty high among the expansion teams.
Sure.
That is fair. But I would say, just looking at the rankings, I would say Shock is probably underrated, just a bit. They're better than people would probably expect. Krusty's experiment would probably surprise them, and then overrated. Just from scrims right now, maybe Gladiators, maybe.
In what respect? Like they won't turn out to be this mega team people think?
Because they're really like in the top 4 in a lot of the power rankings, and I don't think they're top 4 right now. Yeah, and I would say I love Matt, but Fuel's power ranking maybe should not be where they are. Maybe so.
Too high, you mean?
They're too high where they are. Maybe the Fuel just maybe, but actually also maybe because some of their players were not here yet.
OG,
I think they just arrived in the US, so I think that may start changing scrim results because they were playing with really high ping. So yeah.
Wait a minute. So he just right, Monty, I can't let these things go. Like, it's just my nature, right? So he picked someone for overrated. He picked a team that, like, everyone who isn't a fan of this team has always thought they were overrated, except for, like, half a stage, rather. And on top of that, he then said, well, saying that they're overrated, we were playing scrims with the one high ping, and that guy who was, like, the best player on the entire team, he wasn't even there, so... Anyway, it's like he went bald and then he just backed it all the way back out of the garage again.
I will say he was there, but if he was on high ping, I'm giving him the caveat. So there you go.
It's always that with the Dallas Fuel though, right? Like there's always some sort of like contingency that makes you. It's almost like it's designed to like hide their badness. Like it's almost like Hastro's some sort of evil puppet master who's like, well, I know we're bad, but what if Effect went back to Korea so our fans would have an excuse as to why we're bad? What if our players, were just scattered all over the world? What if we hired XQC and then when he got suspended, we could blame it on our team synergy? What if we made Taimu a main tank?
I can't believe Monty actually.
Like, you know what I mean?
Why did Monty always
like the Dallas Fuel excuse train is like 1,000 cars long at this point in time because there's always some fucking reason that you can say that they are being criminally underrated, right?
I figured though when you said evil puppet master, it was going to be like, right, well, Effect's back. Taimu started playing well again. We've got a new coach, right? XQC, I'm sorry, we're going to have to get you banned, mate. Like I thought you were going to go with that angle. Like, so the joke was like he was the one pushing XQC. XQC, what are your thoughts on emojis and race relations in the 20th century?
You forgot the part where Siegel sat out for 2 stages. Oh, right.
No, it was better than that. What he did,
they changed his role. They're like, if only we had Siegel's Genji right now instead of him playing D.Va, surely Dallas Fuel would be saved. Like, it is absolutely insane how many opportunities they have created for their own fans to justify their losses.
remember, the key detail is that was even itself built with the trapdoor in, because what they did is they waited until Seagull got good in Overwatch, which, you know, no one knew if that would happen. And then when it did, they were like, pull him from the team. You retire now. It's like, oh, another thing. We catch the thing about us poor guys in Texas. We just can't catch a break, man.
So there's this like. So if you guys don't know this, but when you're in the dugout, right, during the match, like there's these dugouts, right, with the team set up. And between maps, like at the end of a map, you fill out this like sheet where you want to say like, I want to swap this player with this player for the next map, whatever, right? And then you hand the sheet to a like an OWL operations person, and they walk that sheet, you know, to like the production people. Then they walk it over to the other team's dugout.
The system? Okay, yeah.
So I'd be sitting there. We'd be playing against like Dallas Fuel. And, you know, we'd like fill out our sheet. We'd be waiting for the Dallas Fuel, you know, roster sheet to come into us to see like who they're swapping. They
were rolling a D20 over on the other side of the desk.
And they would just walk in with this sheet, and I would just look at it. My eyes would get big, like, what? You know, like I was not expecting that. And then we'd have to come up with a plan, like in the moment, to like figure out, like, what does this mean? Like, what are they doing here? Like, what is the point of this? You know?
I like the way he's taken the Yu-Gi-Oh approach to making a fucking Overwatch team. Like, oh, you've activated my trap card. What is he doing? What is the strategy?
Dallas Fuel is honestly, I mean, the D20 ref is like, they are sort of like the most dysfunctional Dungeons and Dragons game ever, where, you know, you're starting to get like none of the numbers quite add up. Your players are going rogue. They're like trying to switch their classes from like wizard to like warrior or whatever the fuck is going on, and nothing actually makes sense in the game. It's just wild to think about what happened last season. And before people jump down my throat, like, I know it wasn't, you know, the management's fault. Like, obviously, a lot of what happened with Effect was due to the fact that he needed a break. And, you know, it wasn't inside their, everything was not always inside their control. But it is like absolutely ludicrous. If you just think, if we can, as I did a few minutes ago, take all of the shit that happened and then sequence it and just talk about it, it's almost unbelievable that many things could go wrong.
I mean, even the issues with the visas currently, that's out of their control. It's just bad luck. That's why I'm really pulling for them. I really hope they do well. So, you know, I've always been a fan of their team. So I really hope so.
If they keep having any problems, just tell them to contact this company called Riot Games, who actually like changed, I think, the entire US Constitution to change how visas are done. Something like that, Monty. I forget the exact details, but if anyone actually comes from League of Legends, straight fire reference. Otherwise, just let it go. Just let that one pass by safely into the sky. What about Monty? You have to pick them then. Come on, who's your underrated, overrated?
I think I agree with Valiant being overrated for the reasons that I was talking about earlier. I think that Izayaki is really going to have to step up, and so will Kariv if they're going to perform well. As flashy of a Tracer player as Bunny was, he's sort of a solo operator, which Soon was in a way as well, but he's not. He's great in a dueling situation. He's not the best team player overall. So I think Valiant might be getting a little bit overrated. I might say the same things about Gladiators. I think it was sort of by losing Fissure but gaining Decay, it was sort of net neutral. So I think that's going to be a part of it. I do think that in terms of maybe, I'm trying to remember all the power rankings I've seen. I think some people put maybe Guangzhou a little higher than I would expect. I think Guangzhou will have a stronger start than an end to the season. Because I just don't think their ceiling is that high, but they may come in with some good experience into the season.
Holy shit, I didn't realize how bad some of these power rankings are. Like,
what are you looking at?
I just opened one. I'm just going to straight flame. I don't even care. I just opened one from the Game House, and they have Vancouver Titans #1. Like they've literally done some.
Maybe that might be possible in stage 1, but.
Like that's pretty bold. Like whoever did that, you are actually the caricature people pretend Monty is, where your logic is like, well, it was the best team in Korea, therefore it must be the best in the world. It's like Monty actually never even used to do that. He sometimes even picked like the second best Korean team to win. Like that's not even, you at least get the caricature right. And they had Paris Eternal #2, right? Whoever this is, you are from France, right? I assume, right? I'm just going to go ahead and assume that, like Paris Eternal #2. Have you ever heard of the NYXL? They're pretty fucking good roster, you know. Like I don't know how much you love Soon and everyone else French, but better than the NYXL.
What's Sideshow Overwatch's rankings?
Yeah, what is that?
His were okay, I think. London 1 for him, NYXL 2, Philly Fusion 3, Shock 4, Glad 5, 6 Valiant. I think 6 Valiant's too high. Titan 7, maybe too high. 8 Fuel is quite surprising.
Oh, that's the one where Toronto was ahead of ATL. Sorry, Brad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Hangzhou. Hangzhou is probably being somewhat underrated. I think that it's possible for them to finish in 7th or 8th place and squeak into the playoffs and maybe even be a playoff threat down the line. Like they've got quite a bit of talent, and from what we saw, like Gushui looks like the real fucking deal as far as main tanks go.
Oh, I apologize, by the way. I'll just say this. It turns out that was a ranking of the expansion teams, right? That makes sense now. I was going to say...
Okay, all right.
I just Googled it and clicked it. I thought they lost their mind there. Fair enough.
No, I don't think Paris is even number 2 among expansion teams, but... so I do think that they have like some pretty great players, you know, Godsby and Bazi coming in at the DPS roles. It's just about whether or not they can integrate the figure out the Chinese and Korean language potential issues. But I think by the end of the season, they're going to be pretty good. So I guess I think I'm probably higher on Hangzhou than many other people are.
To be fair, based on the Sideshow one, I think Sideshow's pretty good, actually.
It is pretty good.
That many that look wild here.
Like, it seemed pretty trash to me. I don't know. Yeah, we're at 16 in that one. Get out of here.
Okay.
I do think that you'll probably be higher than 16.
Thanks, Monty.
I do think he's definitely higher than 16.
Yeah, I think the Fuel and the Valiant have been overrated by Sideshow.
I have to give credit to Sideshow because I have to say I thought being a Westerner he would fall into the trap that everyone else seems to have, like thinking that the Houston Outlaws is going to be amazing. Whereas I have to say that's a team where it's like, where are the upgrades? Like,
yeah,
it's an okay roster, like, you know.
Well, I mean, so here's the argument you could make potentially for the Houston. I'm not going to agree, but I think that the argument that you make is, how many times did Houston play to map 5 and lose last season? They played a lot of matches very close. When they were in metas that were comfortable for them, they were good and like making stage playoffs. And
they were a very competent team, sure.
In metas that were bad for them, a lot of the time that the reason why they were bad was because they lacked a tracer player. And on paper, by getting Dante in there, who was very competitive on the Shock as a tracer player and was probably one of the most improved players since the start of Overwatch League, you could make an argument that was going to really power up their roster, I think. However, I do also believe that, Linkser was pretty inconsistent. He would hit very high highs and pretty low lows. Their tank line, I think, is questionable at this point in time based on the sort of waning performances of players like Muma, who looked super good when the season started, but he has a way of playing Winston, and it's a very aggressive way of playing Winston. It's a very solo way of playing Winston, and that sort of fell out of favor as teams learned how to deal with it. So I'm less confident that he's going to be the one to really lead this team to success. And Coolmat is a good diva player, but remember that they have to split their, they were always subbing in Spree as the Zarya player. So what's that going to look like as the season goes on? I think it's tough. I think it's going to be tough for them because they don't have players who are well-rounded. They have a bunch of specialists. And I'm not sure that strategy is going to work as well in Overwatch League Season 2 as it did in Season 1.
Like, for sure in Season 1, like, Houston was hurt by the overall, like, rule set, and Boston was helped, right? Like, the fact that map 5 was a Koth, and that Koth favors basically tracers popping off, meant that Boston would always win in map 5, and Houston would always choke. And so, but the thing is now tracer's not like a huge part of Koth, so the fact that this problem has been corrected for Season 2 doesn't immediately help them, right? Like for any sort of map 5 scenario. But I do think Dante is an upgrade, for sure. Like, I think, and he's not an upgrade over anyone specific. He's just like an addition to the team, right? Where he's there to like do a lot. I love the fact, by the way, that like Jay's cat has refused to not sit on his desk Like 10 times now? I don't know. How many times?
By the way, Monty,
I don't know if jumping on my desk.
I don't know if you caught this, Monty, but that was one of the weirdest disclaimer/caveats I've ever heard. Because what he said, Monty, was like pure doublespeak. He was like, Dante, square brackets, former player of mine. I think he's actually an upgrade, not over anyone, but he will be an addition, which is like, I don't think you can play 7 players in the game, Brad. So I believe he's going to have to be an upgrade over someone if he's going to take someone's starting spot. I'm just saying. I don't clearly know anything about the game, but I do definitely know how the 6-man roster system works. So, you know, I like the way you did that. You
nothing gets past Thorin, man. Literally every single time.
The clever thing is, I didn't know this, but what you got to do is you just got to walk it. I do it the wrong way around, Monty. I like try and say up front, listen, I'm not being that serious now, and then I make the ridiculous comment. You go the other way. You make the ridiculous comment first, so you get to enjoy the feeling of saying ridiculous things, but then you walk it back really quickly after. But then again, who knows anything really in life? In fact, I could just be a butterfly dreaming I'm a man right now, in which case, did I make the right choices, or did I dream I made the right choices? I'll leave the question to you, Monty, or imagine dream of Monty in a butterfly in a fucking brain in a jar somewhere. I don't know, like... We've always got to have the caveats.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sold on this roster, and they might actually. So here's an interesting thing. They might do okay as things start off because you have all the pieces to make a strong GOATS move, right? The problem is that once these guys get in game, so once these guys lock in their players and they go into the server, their adaptability is very low. So if you do something that is going to, throw them for a loop, they're not going to be able to deal with it. So I think what we're going to see from the Outlaws is some polished GOATs.
Isn't that the same problem as last year, Monty, where like whoever came in the server, you knew how they were going to play, basically?
Yeah. I mean, but in some ways they were good enough last year to get away with it. But I think that's a symptom of Overwatch League Season 1. I think teams are going to be much better about adapting in game in Season 2. And we saw that evolve as the season went on. So I don't think that's going to be something they can really exploit any longer.
Wait, how is Jay's cat's head in Jay's screen, but Jay's tail is in Monty's screen?
Different cats.
Oh.
Are you sure?
It's a conspiracy. Monty actually is handing Jay his script as they talk on the show. Like, right now you have to talk shit. Was it? Yo, but I love him. I used to work with him. You know what you have to do for the numbers, Jay. I didn't get you on this show for your personality, son. Just read the script. What about this then? So one team we actually have not touched on at all this episode, except to talk about Jaesun, is the Seoul Dynasty. Now, for a team that was so underwhelming in Season 1, never ever got it together at any point in time, basically, this is a team that looks like it's done some pretty nice off-season moves. Got Fisher in, as we say, got Jaesun. Obviously, they still retained some of the really good talent like Fletter. What do you think of the Seoul Dynasty?
I think that Jaesun was one of the top players that people were looking to recruit during this offseason. And I think that the long-term fortune of Seoul Dynasty, especially as the league moves towards localization, is that they are always, as long as they're willing to pay or match offers, which I don't see why they wouldn't, they are always going to get the first crack at most great Korean players, especially new players and rookies, because the Korean players are obviously going to prefer to be on an all-Korean roster for the most part, and they're going to prefer to be located in Seoul, in Korea. So I think this is probably one of the first times we're going to see that happen. Jaesun's reputation is that he is an excellent shot caller within the team, and I think that was one of the big issues that Seoul suffered from in the last season. And they've also gone out and they picked up people like Marvel. We spent a lot of time discussing how they had tank problems. Well, they got Fissure and Marvel, so you've got 2 options you can work with there, who are both going to be quite talented. So I think they're looking pretty good. They should be better than they were last year.
I mean, Toronto's a pretty cool spot to be if you're Korean as well, If you couldn't pick Seoul, obviously Toronto, you'd pick second, right, Monty? That's the next spot to be in.
I think probably most Koreans would pick like either China to be closer to Korea or Los Angeles, which has like the largest Korean expat population of any city outside of Korea, effectively. But what are you guys' thoughts on Jaesun? Because he was a pretty hot free agent there for
I mean, Brad said earlier that he was impressed when they trialed him, right?
Yeah. I mean, his ult tracking's on point. His shot calling is enthusiastic.
Was he like heavily bidded for? Were people going for him, or was it already kind of known he was probably going to go to Seoul?
No comment.
Was there a lot of interest in general though? Obviously, you guys didn't get him. We can get that part. Like I picked that part up. Don't worry about it. Like that wasn't unobvious. But was he actually like within the scene highly rated?
Yes, he was. I'd say so.
Jay, you've been suspiciously quiet about how good the Seoul dynasty is going to be, my friend.
I would say
anyone you hit on that team, you've got some sort of grudge to settle with through analysis.
I will not talk bad about my fellow Overwatch League team.
Here we go. Why break the habit of a lifetime, right, Jay? Fucking hell. Earlier on, do you think this player leaving? No. It's like, what? We didn't even finish the sentence. Everything no to Wizard Hyung. Say no, kids. Not even Wizard Hyung. Not even once.
But I will say though that Jaesun did also trial for us, and he is a fantastic shot caller, mechanically very gifted. His ult tracking is very much on point, and I think Seoul Dynasty made some very smart choices. With Fisher and Marvel. And obviously they did keep Fleta, who's probably arguably one of the best flex DPS in the league. So I think they'll be pretty strong. And they are in the prime position of being the Korean team.
Of course.
And so a lot of Korean players, even though they didn't have the best season one, that Korean players do just generally want to be on that team. So I won't say if Seoul Dynasty outbid us. Actually, we trialed him past the I guess what is the that time period where only the expansion teams could bid. So
the exclusivity window.
Yeah, we were past that window. So Seoul and us were actually bidding on him at the same time.
Right. Yeah, Monty. I didn't want to interrupt him to say it there, but again, I was trying to put the pieces together, and I was thinking, was he that highly scouted? His choices were the Seoul Dynasty, the Atlanta Reign, or the Toronto Defiant. Like, these were teams he was heavily trying out on. So he definitely had some teams bidding for him. I do know that in the end, one of the factors, and he did say, was that he did, and I think that was kind of a caveat why he didn't eventually settle on Atlanta Reign, was he did prefer an all-Korean roster. Right.
So that's why near the end he was trialing for both Toronto and Seoul Dynasty. But obviously Seoul Dynasty generally tends to be a Korean player's first pick.
Yeah. He did say that to us. And also what I can say in general is, even though that's true, Jaesun's English skills for like a Korean living in Korea were actually pretty decent. I think from like a long-term standpoint in his career, the idea that he might one day end up on an English-speaking team would not be far-fetched. He already had some baseline skills there. As for Seoul Dynasty, I think one of the problems that Seoul has is simply a meta one, and not to say that Fisher can play anything, right? Like he's shown skills on both Ryan and Winston. But what I would say is that like last season, a lot of Seoul's success when they had it, to me, felt like Fleta doing like really long, hard flanks, like really, really crazy flanks and getting away with it. But the meta that we're in right now, this GOATS meta, is not really a hard flanking meta. Like there's a little bit of soft flanking here and there with like D.Va and Zarya and stuff. But it's a much more straightforward style of like 6 people bashing heads together type of Overwatch, right? Not like these like long setups where like, people are coming in from these like long adventures off on the flanks. So stylistically, at least with their DPS players, I'm not sure that this meta is like a perfect match for them. So I think there's a potential for them struggling a little bit out the gate in the GOATS meta, and then as the season evolves back into a DPS meta, if GOATS continues to lose popularity or get nerfed further, then they might do better later in the season.